With me today is Rob Sleece, and Rob's going to share some of his story with us. So, Rob, would you share with us some of what led you into and out of faith in your journey through life?
Sure. First, good morning, Journey Church. For me, I grew up in a non-denominational church, so it was, right down the street, literally at the bottom of my hill. Very nice people, but a very formal type of church in the way that you didn't ask a lot of questions. It was, this is what's in the Bible. This is what it says. We don't really get into any type of judgment about it, and we just have to live this way. And as time went on, I was a very inquisitive kid, so I would ask questions, and a very classic one that I always tell people is I had real questions about Noah's Ark. I mean, as a kid, I was trying to figure out, they put all of these animals on this boat. I mean, this is just amazing to me. How did they do this? And I remember asking my Sunday school teacher that, and she's like, well, it's in the Bible. We just have to go with it. So I was like, oh, okay, all right. We don't ask a lot of questions. She's like, if it's in the Bible, it happened. I said, okay. Well, as time went on, our church had a change in pastors, and things started to get even a little more judgmental. It started to be about, what the pastor, we had church leadership was asking things like what was, the pastor wearing that day, or what was his weight like, or how did that present to God, and things like that. And I started to ask myself a question, why, religion, it seemed to me that it was getting to be very judgmental of people, and it became a very negative view.
So, Rob, how would you say those experiences influenced your faith?
Those experiences influenced me negatively, so I started to have a very negative view of religion in general, organized religion. So I started to think about, these people that were judging other people within my own church, and if they were doing that I want to be a part of something like that. And, if they were going to judge our own pastor, the person that was supposed to be speaking the word of God, is that something that I wanted to be a part of? So I just started to walk away. It just got to a point where I started to align myself more with a scientific view. So, I was a big science person, biology, chemistry, things like that. So I started to try to scientifically break down why God did not exist.
And you've shared with me previously, Rob, there was a time in your life when you embraced atheism. Would you share with us some of what led you into that direction?
Yes, so a part of it, when talking about my younger years in church and, getting that whole negative view with church, along that time I also had a family tragedy. So we've all had tragedies in our lives. One of them that was very, very detrimental to me was the loss of my cousin. He was murdered when I was 11 years old. He was 22 years old. So he was in the military, was doing, a really nice service for somebody, was driving someone home, thought he was doing the right thing, and the person ended up killing him in a robbery. So for me, again, starting to have problems with faith and starting to have questions about faith, the first thing I did was, and something I've done a lot in my life, and maybe some of you can relate to this, is I went straight to anger. So for me, it was anger at, the fact that I lost this, my cousin, someone I was very close with. Anger at God, and anger at the idea that this all-powerful God would allow something like that to happen. So lining up with atheism, and where I went with that was, if he is an all-powerful God, he has the ability to do things and stop things and do good things and bad things, right? So he can do what he wants. So in this case, I mischaracterized it as he allowed this to happen. He was okay with this to happen. So because of that, I didn't want anything to do with God.
And how would you say that atheism affected your life?
So, at the time, it seemed like I was doing the right thing, right? I was smarter than this idea of God. That I was, I had science and I had proof behind me. God wasn't sitting right here. He wasn't right here talking to me, so he didn't exist. And it allowed me to have this very selfish view. So although from the external side, people would look at me as though I had everything. I was a very smart kid, very good academically, very good in sports. Everything looked good. But what I was doing, internalizing it as an atheist, it was selfishness. It was everything was about me. It was about doing what I wanted to do. It was about, engaging in all kinds of risky behavior, of course, underage drinking, speeding, racing, doing all these things that I shouldn't have been doing. But as an atheist, the beauty for me was there was no consequence to that, right? So it didn't really matter what happened. There was nobody there that was actually overlooking what I was doing. And it didn't matter because tomorrow, if you ended up dying, you didn't go anywhere anyway. So it just didn't really matter.
So looking back, what ways did you see God trying to lead you back toward faith?
Wow, it is so powerful now that I'm sitting here today in such a very loving church-like journey. Just how much He has affected my life, even though I slighted Him so many times in life and acted like He didn't even exist. So a couple great examples that I'll provide, which to me to this day, I know I'm here because of God. So my cousin Stephen, the one that was murdered, him and I growing up, we were very close. We were both really into hunting, and we were really into shooting our BB guns. And we used to get in a lot of trouble in the house with our BB guns because if you remember the old Red Ryder BB gun, you would literally load it. So you would take the top off, and you would dump these BBs into the top channel and channel them down in. Well, we were awful at it, and we were kids. So they would dump all over the floor. And my aunt would come in and just yell at us nonstop about cleaning up all these BBs. So after he passed, years went on, and I'm talking years of this happening, where in my own house, we were doing this in his house. In my own house, I would walk around and find BBs in my house. No explanation at all for why that was happening. My mom would find them. And my mom, throughout all of this, was a very deeply religious person, and she would come to me, even as I was struggling with the whole idea of God and turned to atheism. She said, this is God's way of letting you know that Stephen is okay, and he is there, and he is with God, and everything is okay. Another great example is, so in my reckless days of being an atheist and not really caring about others, just about myself, was I was really into fast cars and speeding and racing. And so in one of my little bouts of going out and driving on back roads 100 miles an hour one day, I took a turn too fast. And back on old country roads, there's no guardrail or anything like that. And I had a rear-wheel drive car. So it spun out on me. It slid the whole way out around. And the back wheels literally went over the back embankment. So there is no reason to this day, and I look at it now, and I know that it was divine intervention. I know it was God. At the time, I didn't. At the time, science would not explain that, right? There was no friction. There was no ability for that car to do what it did to actually grab a hold again and get back on the road. It should have fell off. But that was another experience where I know God was playing in my life, even though I had totally forsaken Him.
So, Rob, at this time in your life, what would you say to the atheist who says, well, why do I need faith? Why do I need God?
Yes. So my biggest response to that now, being here where I was, and if anybody is out there in my shoes right now where I was, would be that atheism, there is just so many wonders in this world. There are so many things that science in and of itself cannot explain. I think science, in conjunction with God, explains this world. And living a life of atheism ultimately leads to a life of just selfishness, living for yourself, not having consequences, and really just being one of those people that, is just, not really thinking about, others. Where what I think is just so perfect, and you see on these signs here on the side, is love God, love people. And that's what faith is all about. And that's what brings you back to God, is the fact that we're all in this interconnected world together, and God provides that love and that guidance for us. And I would just encourage people to explore it, to think about it more, ask those questions. Here at Journey, you have that opportunity to ask those questions. And there's not going to be an answer to everything in this world, but God is going to get you through everything.
Rob, thank you so much for sharing and being so open today. Would you express your appreciation to him?
Thank you.
And just as a quick reminder, in your program this morning, there's a number that you can text in questions. Then I'll try to answer them at the conclusion of the message. We're in a Googling God series. And today we're addressing a rather blunt question. Should I be an atheist? A definition of an atheist is a person who does not believe in the existence of a God or any gods. You saw in the character of Stephen Hawking in the clip from the movie The Theory of Everything. And near the end of his life, he famously said that there is no possibility that God exists. Is that true? Is that belief to be cheered? If there is no God, where does the hope he spoke of come from? Like Hawking, there are many people who think that the idea of God is a useless concept that's no longer needed. So let's deal head on with the question that confronts all of us. Is there a God? And I want to say up front that what we're going to be talking about today isn't something that's all touchy-feely and that you're going to leave on an emotional high. It's challenging, and it will require significant thoughtfulness and attention in our search for truth. There are three options in answering the question of God's existence. Atheism believes there is no God. Agnosticism believes we can't know whether or not there's a God. Theism believes there is a God. Now notice, all three involve believing. Even atheism is a belief system. How do you know which one is right or true? Let's look first at atheism. Is its denial of the existence of God true? The diagram on the side screens may help us think through this. A represents all truth everywhere. B represents all truth known by human beings. And C represents the knowledge of any individual person. An atheist, as an individual, can legitimately say, in circle C, in my experience, I recognize the existence of no God. But that belief does not make it true. For atheists to deny the assertion embraced by the vast majority of human beings throughout history who have said that they have experienced God, that's beyond the limits of knowability by atheists. And let's be clear, to hold an atheistic belief that no God exists anywhere is itself a statement of faith. Persons who reject theism often do so by saying, well, faith in God can't be proved. They often believe that Christians are motivated by irrational faith. They often are under the impression that faith in God is wishful thinking, choosing fantasy over fact. But atheism involves faith. Faith that there is no God, and that cannot be proved. Atheists and theists alike live by faith of one sort or another. So atheists do not have the high ground on logic or certainty, as some people think, concluding that somehow they are superior to people who just muddle along in faith. So let's examine what many people consider are reasons for making a faith commitment to atheism. Now, this is the one that a college roommate of mine held. All or nearly all religious people I've met are losers. He'd say to me, I don't get it, DuVal. Why is it that most of the people I know who are Christians are losers? They're people who cannot make it in the real world. Some atheists believe that Christians are naive, if not unintelligent, and they don't want to be associated with them. So they distance themselves by identifying with the atheist position. Some atheists say, I've chosen a scientific worldview which prohibits me from believing in anything that can't be verified either by my senses or a mathematical proof. They think that religious faith is a primitive feature of an immature civilization that must be outgrown. They contend that the scientific method is the only trustworthy way of discovering truth. If they cannot know something through their physical senses, as far as they're concerned, it's not real. Now, this was initially true of one of Jesus' own disciples. Listen to John 20:25. Thomas said to them, unless I see the scars of the nails in his hand, and put my finger on those scars and my hand in his side, I will not believe. Many atheists hold a worldview that supposes that science and faith are incompatible and opposed to each other. But atheism is itself a belief system that is not based on science. The scientific method and faith are not incompatible. They need not be opposed to each other. Now, some atheists are quite candid in stating, I have certain behaviors I don't want to give up, which are inconsistent with the belief in the God of the Bible. At least they're honest. They wish to live in whatever way they want, and they want to avoid the internal tension and qualms of conscience that can come from the belief that there is such a thing as right and wrong. So they just deny the possibility of there being a God which might hold them accountable for their behavior. So as an alternative to doing something bothersome, like changing their behavior to fit into some ethical expectations, they simply decide to reject any biblically based moral code. I mean, that way at least, they're not being hypocritical by professing a belief that's denied by their actions. Some atheists say, I used to be very religious, but I had a horrible experience, so I rejected it as an act of self-preservation. They experienced God's church as being judgmental and condemning, which Rob spoke about. So instead of encountering and caring and compassionate folks among God's people, they were rejected, they were ridiculed, and the guilt was piled on so deep that they had to wear hip boots to wade through it. They were made to feel unworthy, like outcasts, so for the sake of their own emotional well-being, they decided not to have anything to do with God or God's church. That breaks God's heart, and that ought to break our hearts as well. Some atheists say, I once believed in God, but experiences of suffering, injustice, and evil have led me to conclude that God must not exist. There are people who just can't reconcile in their minds the existence of a loving God with suffering and evil in the world. It doesn't make sense to them. They just can't believe that if there is a God, that God would allow pain and agony in the world to continue. Even many believers struggle to understand the problem of evil. But instead of blaming God for the world's sufferings and heartaches, Christ's followers recognize that the vast majority of hurt in the world comes from our own human sinfulness. James 4:2. You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. The truth is that we bring much of the pain in the world on ourselves. Some atheists say, I have thoroughly examined the evidence, and I have concluded proof for the existence of God is less than compelling. They at least have engaged in a serious spiritual search. They've studied, they've given it thoughtful consideration. But they did not find the kind of proof they were looking for, similar to what the band sang this morning from U2. Now, some of these reasons may seem more valid than others, and they may not all be logically watertight, but they are the kinds of reasons many people use in making decisions in their lives. And I want to be clear. They are reasons that need to be addressed. Though most of them have very little to do with God and more to do with our human failings. Occasionally, I have people tell me that they don't believe in God. And when that happens, I try to ask, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in. Oftentimes when people describe the kind of God they've rejected, I'm right there with them. I don't believe in the harsh, vindictive, mean-spirited God that they think that they've turned away from. But it's important to understand that it's possible to believe in the one true God who is very different from that. Instead of by faith saying no to God, there are excellent grounds for saying yes to God by faith. There are convincing and logical reasons for making a faith commitment to theism. The first is, if God doesn't exist, the big questions of life remain unanswered. Where does everything come from? Why does something exist rather than nothing? Why did the Big Bang bang? When it did and how it did? Does human history lead anywhere, or is it all in vain? Are good and evil, right and wrong, ultimate realities, or mere social constructs, mere human opinions? The faith of atheism has no answers for these questions other than random chance. Scientific studies in cosmic background radiation and star formation and decay point to a genesis of this universe some 15 billion years ago. Why did it pop into existence so amazingly calibrated to make planets and organic compounds possible with astounding intricacy? Is it possible that there is a divine creator behind it all? The idea of a creator God makes a lot more sense to me than the idea that all that exists is just the result of some unplanned accident, a mindless mechanism without any transcendent or spiritual dimensions. As I look out on the wonder of the universe, I feel this deep sense of reverence and worship, and it draws me toward belief in God rather than toward disbelief and doubt. And interestingly, many atheists say that they experience wonder, but for some reason they don't connect it with God. Second, if the existence of God is rejected, life loses its meaning. The atheist, Jean-Paul Sartre, believed that God did not exist. And it makes all the difference in the world, he said. You see, he had the courage to explore what it would mean to live in a godless world. He concluded that it would leave a world with absolutely no meaning or no purpose outside of ourselves. But when war breaks out, or the lab tests are positive, or you receive that dreaded phone call in the middle of the night, there is something inside of us that cries out to understand. We want to know the meaning or purpose to what happens in life. Belief in God helps us to make sense of life as we really experience it. Atheism only leads to meaninglessness. In times of desperate need in your life, does it really help for you to think of yourself as only a conglomeration of randomly stuck together molecules? Does it really help you to think of your life that it doesn't make any difference? Does it really help you to think that one day you'll die and that'll be it? If we're only lumps of protoplasm, as atheism holds, products of blind mechanical chance with no design, no destiny, and even cursed with consciousness so that we recognize that we human beings really, we're no different than a cockroach that's been stepped on. Is that kind of meaninglessness what you want for your life? Third, the historical results of unbelief are horrific. Now, we need to admit that unhealthy faith, that sick religion, has at times in history led to bloody wars and terrible injustices. It's true, it's tragic. But the reality is that the most horrifying regimes of the past century, those regimes that included torture and mass murder, like those of Stalin and Pol Pot, they were based on the atheistic assumption that religion was the problem. Historically, when a society does not believe in God, things pretty consistently go bad. It leads to the kind of thinking that we saw in the clip from the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. Having contempt for others, thinking that they are beneath you. You see, without a life-transforming faith in God, people simply cannot sustain the will to do good, it seems. At least not in the numbers that are needed to keep societies from slipping into a nightmare of moral and social decay. Because the practical implications of atheism have led to such disastrous results on a national scale, atheism as a belief system, it just doesn't work for the well-being of humanity. Fourth, if there is no God, the problems of evil and suffering are in no way solved. Whether our faith is in atheism or theism, whether we believe or we refuse to believe in God, we're still left with the problem of evil and suffering in the world. Trying to remove God from the picture, that doesn't really solve anything. If you do not believe in God, does that make the suffering of a child any less tragic? If you do not believe in God, what hope is there that something good might come out of the bad? If you don't believe in God, there's no God for you to blame. But neither is there a God that you can reach out to for strength and comfort and a higher perspective. There's no God to make meaning of the madness. There's only madness. So it seems that denying the existence of God through atheism, it solves very little and it costs a lot. On the other hand, faith in Christ offers at least the possibility of suffering somehow becoming redemptive. Isaiah 53:5 says, because of our sins, he was wounded, beaten because of the evil we did. We are healed by the punishment he suffered, made whole by the blows he received. On the cross of Jesus, which is a historical reality, not a fantasy, he took the sin and the suffering of the world upon himself. And through his resurrection, he has overcome the power of evil and death and destruction. Trust in Christ offers the hope that good ultimately will win out over the bad. Atheism just leaves us with the bad. Fifth, if God doesn't exist, no absolute moral standard exists. Without God, we're all left with our own human opinions and preferences. I mean, nothing is absolute. Without God as a reference point, words like right and wrong, good and bad, justice and injustice, they lose their meaning. For example, who's to say that lying and adultery and child molestation are wrong? Who's to say? If I say my breaking into your home and stealing things there and taking your stuff, that's okay, and you say, well, no, it's not, who gets to determine what's right and what's wrong if there's no higher authority to appeal to? Now, I know some people might argue, well, society can decide what's socially or morally or legally acceptable, but human laws often aren't right. Remember, there was a time when it was legal to own people in this country. Just because a majority of people believe something at a given time doesn't make it right. I mean, do you imagine that Holocausts are moral if 51% of the public might think it's okay? You see, if there is no God, everything is permissible. Atheism leaves no standard beyond ourselves to look to in order to determine what ultimately is right or wrong. Anything goes. 6, if there is no God, innate spiritual longings don't make sense. I think that inside each of us, there's this inner longing for the transcendent, this yearning to know God. In his autobiographical Confessions, Augustine wrote one of the most famous prayers of all time. You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. In creating us, God placed in us a spiritual longing to know him, to have a relationship with him, to be connected with him. Now you may be thinking, well, I don't buy that. I think it's all just an illusion. It can't be proven. I, for one, don't believe the spiritual longing within me is just some cruel cosmic prank. I think it is evidence of the ability to relate to a God who is really there. Deep within me, I resonate with what the psalmist wrote. I'm homesick, longing for your salvation. I'm waiting for your word of hope. Our innate spiritual longing was described by novelist Richard Seltzer in this way. My entire life has been one search for faith. I do not believe in God. Having said that, I want you to know that I love the idea of God. Without it, you lead your life unmoored, in a state of isolation. You are a tiny speck in a vast universe. I'm jealous, frankly. I feel as though I've missed out on the greatest thing that can happen to a person, faith in God. It must be wonderful. There they are. Reasons for holding to a faith in atheism and reasons for embracing a faith in God. Which makes more sense to you? Which leads to the kind of life that you want? Friends, the choice is yours. Let's see what may have been texted in as a question. What does it mean to be an atheist? If you say you are a Christian, but act as if there is no God, you aren't generous, you don't serve others, you don't go to church or read your Bible or pray, are you an atheist in practice? Okay. The Greek word for God is theos, theism. A means not. So not of God, not belief in God. So an atheist is one who does not believe in the existence of a God or any gods. If you say you are a Christian but act as if there is no God, are you an atheist in practice? Maybe, maybe not. The doing of being generous, serving people, going to church, those are fruits of being a Christian, but they don't make you a Christian. One makes the decision to commit one's life to Jesus by faith. That's what makes you a Christ follower. When you genuinely do that, then you will see these and other actions and attitudes evident in your life. Okay, those must be the only two questions. Thank you for that. We want to conclude by saying this. It's always good to ask questions at Journey. It is important to grapple with questions that impact our lives and the lives of other people. And I thank you for being willing during this Googling God series to deal with tough issues, which is a kind of apologetics. So you'll learn more about matters of faith.